All right, time to unset. How you doing today? How you feeling? That's enough small talk. Let's get after it. Hey, welcome in, everybody. I want to get right to it today. We got a great one. My guest is Shane Balkowitsch. Shane's a native of Bismarck, North Dakota, and a photographer, but just saying he's a photographer is a grave understatement. Shane's a wet plate collodion photographer, and if you don't know, the process of wet plate began way back in 1848. It was quickly abandoned for more modern and efficient techniques. The wet plate process is the process of printing on glass with silver and sometimes other lethal chemicals. And again, I'm oversimplifying the process, but there are fewer than 1,000 people in the world that do this today. When I think of Shane's art, I think of him as an alchemist and a historian and a channeler who, through this legacy process, captures so much more than a portrait on glass. His work is being preserved in museums all over the world, and you can find him in the Smithsonian Institute in Oxford, England, and so many more places. His portraits are impactful, political, and honest, and have resulted in death threats, but he's remained committed and dedicated to his path. He's currently working on a series of books that capture and preserve and celebrate the Native American story, and that's how I discovered him. This is a long conversation. It's the longest I've done so far, but it's an important one. And I'm so grateful for Shane's work, his mission, and his time. So sit back, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Shane Balkowitsch. Real quick, I know it's difficult to get into doing the origin story over and over, but just for listeners who may not know you, can you just give us a little brief overview of what you do?
Yeah, I'm a wet plate collodion photographer. One of the first photographic processes that was ever invented by man is the wet plate collodion process, invented by Frederick Scott Archer. And to give your listeners some time frames, that was in 1851 is when he published an article in a scientific magazine called The Chemist, and he gave this process, this ability to take photographs to the world.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing. I will have in the show notes a link to your website. But you didn't even own a camera before 2012, is what I've heard you said. Yeah?
That's correct. Yeah, I never had any interest in photography whatsoever. I just chased this process.
So what brought you there? Because a lot of people naturally when they go into photography, even if you didn't think you were interested in it, you wouldn't start with one of the most difficult processes on the planet. What drew you to the glass plate? Was it just something to mess around with and then you fell in love with, or was it just you read about it? I mean, what made you?
No, I saw
go
an
that
image
route?
on Facebook, so I was just scrolling, and I stopped for whatever reason on this image, and I've said this before. The image wasn't anything that you would usually stop you, would halt you in your tracks during your busy, your day at work or whatever I was doing on that day. And I just I stopped and I lingered there, and if I wasn't on at that specific moment on that specific day, if the person had not posted it on that specific day, I mean, we would have just been two ships in the night, and never had I never would have been introduced to this process. It's so obscure that you just don't. Everyone knows about wet plate. Nobody knows about wet plate collodion photography. There's less than 1,000 of us in the world. So any photographer that knows the history of photography, they will know about it. But the people that are the modern day digital photographers, you don't have to know a lot about the history of photography to pick up a digital camera. That wasn't the case back, in the 1950s or 60s. If you're a photographer, there was this sense that you wanted to know what came before you, and it was analog photography, and it goes back to the only photographic process that predates wet plate collodion photography is called the daguerreotype process, which was developed by a Frenchman by the last name of Daguerre, but that was about 1838. But by 1851, Frederick Scott Archer had figured this out, and it really catapulted photography for normal people like you and myself to have their portraits taken. Up to that time, you would have had to have a painting done of someone, or a drawing or a sketch. There was no way of capturing someone's likeness in such a realistic manner as this process, and it's just absolutely fantastic, and the historical aspects of it, and the history surrounding it, and all the things that it did back then, and all the things that it continues to do today are rather fascinating. And it probably, just to let your listeners know as well, the process died out about 1885 because it was replaced by something newer and more convenient, and like we replace everything in this world.
Yeah, that's the thing, is the legacy techniques get bowled over by what comes next. But now, this time, jumping to 2022, just 10 years later, your works are permanently curated by the Historical Society of North Dakota. So, I mean, and then you're in the Smithsonian Institute, yeah, with the photo of Evander Holyfield?
Yeah, I've got, as of last week, I have 60 museums around the world that are curating not prints of my plates or replicas of my plates, but original black glass ambrotypes, my original works. And I'll briefly explain. An ambrotype, it means eternal impression in Latin. It's a word that comes from the Victorian era. My images are made out of pure silver on black glass. So, and what's beautiful about silver doesn't degrade. So these images will be here 1,000 years from now unbroken, which you can't say for any other means of taking photographs in present day. So they're naturally archival, right? The moment I make them, it started with the State Historical Society. I've got Evander Holyfield's at the Smithsonian. We got Greta Thunberg's portrait at the Library of Congress. The world famous Native American Herd Museum has a set of plates. I've got plates at the Oxford University of the United Kingdom, just to name a few. But there's a list of 60 places that are presently protecting my work.
It will look exactly as it does 100 years from now as it did the day you printed it. It will. There's no deterioration, unlike photos that fade with sunlight or digital photos that deteriorate. There's absolutely zero degeneration if it doesn't get physically harmed, correct?
Yes, and what I explain, and I have college students out, and I have junior high students out, and I have grade school students out, classes, probably 6 to 8 different classes a year come out and visit, and they drive from all over the tri-state area to come visit my studio and to see this process. I tell the students, I say, I have a silver spoon here, and I have a silver spoon in my darkroom. I said, if I lay this silver spoon on the ground and come back 500 years from now, what's on the ground? And the answer must be a silver spoon. And silver doesn't degrade, and silver doesn't fall apart. It's a precious metal, I'm not sure if you're aware. Do you think that silver is innate to Earth?
I don't know. Actually, I would think it would be like a precious metal as gold would, but I can't say definitively that I know that.
All of our heavy metals, gold included, platinums, nickels, coppers, silver, all of our heavy metals, none of them were formed here on Earth. Never in the creation of Earth, and we're talking 4 billion years ago, never in the creation and the formation of Earth was there ever enough energy to create any of our heavy metals. So all of our heavy metals, including the silver that I make my images out of, were brought here on asteroids, comets, or meteors. Every bit of it. So every bit of, if you have a ring on your finger right now, or a necklace, I think I see a metal necklace around your neck. If those are precious metals, I'm not talking about man-made alloys and stuff. I'm talking about precious metals, platinums and golds and silvers and nickels, coppers, those kind of things. The only time that those heavy metals were ever formated is in the explosion of a star. So a star explodes, a supernova explodes, and at that moment, there's enough energy to create these heavy metals. That debris is scattered throughout the cosmos, and these extraterrestrial bodies fly through that debris, collect these molecules of silver, and bring it to Earth, collide with Earth. Then we have our tributaries and our rivers and stuff, bring this stuff together and consolidate it into one area, and we collect it and we've been using it as humans. So it's a very fascinating thing to think that, this ring on my finger, or the plates, my images that I'm making of these people were brought here by that method, and only that method. And that's why we can't go ahead and make some copper tonight. You know what I mean? Like sit in some lab somewhere and make some copper, or go ahead and make some gold. I mean, we can't make any more gold. The gold that is here is the gold that was brought here, and no more gold is being brought to Earth unless we have another collision. It's fascinating.
I mean, being in Baja, we live in Baja, southern Baja, and just north of us is a town called Santa Rosalia.
Okay.
It's on the Sea of Cortez, and it's famous for its copper deposits that were found back in early 1800s, 1850, 1860s, I think. And you can literally walk through the desert and find the Boleo rocks, the blue.
Why only there?
Yeah.
Why only there? The reason is that one of these extraterrestrial bodies with this large amount of debris was crashed there, and that's why there's a gold rush in California, and there's a gold rush that was up in Alaska. That's why it was. It wasn't. There's nothing specific about the San Francisco area that there's more gold formed there for some reason. It just happens to be that a specific meteor with more gold content, or whatever the extraterrestrial body, collided with Earth and landed there. So it's really interesting that the stuff that I make my images out of is stardust, and it's very precious. And that being said, that was billions of years ago. Some of these collisions, millions, tens of millions of years ago. And what's the story there about your question is that the silver's still there, isn't it? It's still there in the ground. It hasn't been unchanged. And it won't change on my plates either.
Amazing. Yeah. What does it feel like when you communicate to the new generation of photographers that come to your studio about they have no recollection, or actually I'm saying they don't have any interaction with. It's not like the 16 or 17-year-old kids today, or 18-year-old kids would even have messed with a film camera before their iPhones. That's really their introduction to this whole world of photography would be through technology. So
correct.
What is the reaction when you show these kids this? Do the lights go on, or do they look thoroughly baffled and just...
Well, it's magical. It's magical because they see it for what it is. It appears, if you were in my darkroom and one of these plates appear in the fixer, Chris, it appears like I'm performing some kind of magic or some kind of miracle. And can you imagine, I've said this before as well, can you imagine back in the 1800s, I would go into some Native American tribe or something and show them this technology, what they must have thought. Like, I mean, these young kids with digital cameras, they've seen the LCD screens. They've seen computers. They've been in the big movie theaters with the projection screens. They've seen they've seen all the technology. They've seen all the ways that you can display someone's image or some kind of imagery. They know all about that, but they don't know anything about this. And so it's almost like I'm performing some kind of like a magic trick or something in front of them. But if you think I can catch the attention and the imagination of someone in modern day, can you imagine 150, 170 years ago? This was one of the most significant scientific, not just achievements, one of the most significant scientific achievements of the 1800s. I mean, with nothing even close to it. I mean, this was an amazing thing that photography, that we were able to point a device at someone. So it's magical, and I've made nearly 4,500 of these over the last decade. And you have to, and I number every one of them, so I know exactly how many I've made. Think about that, 10 years. It took me a decade to make 4,500 of these images. You hire any wedding photographer this weekend for your wedding, and you're going to get 4,500 images in an afternoon in a span of about 3 hours. So that's the crux of the, if you want to call it the problem, that's the puzzle that I'm trying to solve, is that when you slow down and you take more photographs with more intent, you take your time and spend more time. On a Friday, if I spend 8 hours in my studio, I make about 6 portraits. I mean, 8 hours to make 6 portraits is kind of crazy.
Yeah, and it's all about the quality of the work rather versus the quantity, because as you said, with the regular, I can go out and snap 1,000 photos on my iPhone in an hour, and with that process, I just step back for a second. I just talked to a guy named Jimmy Halliburton. He's a guy, and he's a city council member in Idaho, and he talks about, he had a TED talk called Speed of Discovery about slowing down. And when you slow down, the speed at which you move through the universe, your universe expands. So when you do your photography in a way that you're, it's not about the speed of the process. It is about the process. And so when you marry these two in a digital world of today, do you see, I've heard you say that there's no recorded legacy anymore because there's no, the digital world, there's no physical documentation of our history. So
there's no shoebox of photographs.
Exactly. Is there any benefit there? Because think of the millions and millions of photos being taken. It's a documentation process. We're just not looking at any of them. Is it all just digital clutter?
We're taking more photographs today than in the first 150 years of photography. It's a problem.
Yeah.
Not for everyone, but for me, I see it as a problem. It's, information glut. It's like, what is the purpose of these photographs? And not that every photograph has to have a purpose. I'm not trying to get on some kind of soapbox here and try to be some preacher in regards to the merits of photography or the importance of photography. But really, it's we take so many. I can give you a quick example, and it's the technology that's really messing us up. I did a podcast during the pandemic with this new. It was a young photographers podcast or something, and everyone out there does digital. And I had this fabulous conversation with the gentleman, and I've been following that group on Facebook. And this last week, there was someone posted a photograph of this young girl. It was a digital photograph, a young girl she's about a little bit higher than knee high on her mom. And you can see her mom there and the young girl. And he liked this photograph apparently. But what he didn't see, he says, well, I want to know how to fix this. And if you look at the photograph, and not to be crude, but all you see is this beautiful young face of this young girl. And you see this mother's crotch in this photograph. Like it's adjacent right to this young girl's head.
Sure.
And he wanted to know how he could bring her sweater down near her knees to cover up this problemed area. And, I just made I was trying to help. I just said, just try to get it in camera in the first place. It's like, how do you not see? He wasn't looking. We don't look anymore when we take these digital photographs. He wasn't looking.
Right.
He wasn't looking at the composition because the thought is I can fix this in post. The thought is I can fix this later. And my only point was, and I got attacked, was that you're not being sensitive enough to you're not answering his question. And I am answering his question. The answer is next time, let's look at what we're taking a photograph of. And there's no way that you couldn't miss that anatomical problem with this photograph. And they were going out there and they stretched this lady's sweater down to her knees, and you start wondering, well, what reality is this? What's the purpose of this? This wasn't some great Mona Lisa photography that we have to save here, but these were the things that were going into these images after they were made. And so all I did is I took I grabbed the image and I did a nice crop, and you could still see that there was a mother's leg there, and it was an okay photograph, and the cropping that I gave him fixed it, but that's not what he wanted, and I was being insensitive to him because I told him the first rule of photography: look.
Yeah.
Just take a look. Just look at what you're taking a photograph of. But we don't. We take a whole bunch of photographs, and then we decide what we're going to do with them later.
There are a lot of cameras now that actually market as their strengths the ability to just snap anything, and then once it's all done, go back and on your desktop through software, pick your focal points, pick your lighting situation and all that stuff. So it's taking any creativity out of the process of it, the entire process, which is what it's all about in the first place. And in the music business, I spent 25 years in the music business, and people used to laugh. The old joke was, we're going to fix it in the mix. You don't fix it in the mix. You fix it when you're recording, and you don't solve an acoustic problem.
Are we purists, Chris?
Well, maybe we're dinosaurs. And,
we're old purists.
Look, in the world of Elon Musk and Richard Branson, we're Eli Whitney. We're on the cotton gin still, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because there is And I seriously, though, I'm not really a dinosaur, but I believe, I think it was Kurt Vonnegut that said, in order to be a professional in experimentation, you have to first be an expert in the standard or something like that. Like you have to first know where it came from before you start experimenting. Because if you don't know from where it came, then you don't know how to bend and break the rules so that you're just kind of...
You have no point of reference.
Yeah, you're just kind of dicking around. So like in music, you can call me a dinosaur or whatever, but I had a great teacher that if something sounded bad, if an amp sounded bad or a drum didn't have the correct sound, you didn't fix it with an EQ. You went out and moved the mic because it was the listening. It was an acoustic problem. So when you start to take things out with electronic answers, you've changed the whole parameter without even first doing the obvious. So it's just like taking a picture without first looking at your composition. It's because
that's a perfect example.
Yeah,
it's a perfect. Your music example is perfectly aligned with what I did in photography. And I can only fix these photographs. Like there was no saving this crotch photograph of this mother unless you wanted to essentially crop it. And there was no saving it. And we need to get it the first time. And you can only polish these things so much. If it's really bad, you can only polish that song so much, and you can only polish that photograph so much post.
Right.
But when you get in the complete mindset that you know that you have post in mind, you're able to change something digitally about the song or the photograph, you're really missing the point. And that's the only that's the only point that I had to this young photographer. And it's maybe the best lesson that he could ever. But he came back to me and says, "You weren't helpful to me."
Well, you have to take that with a grain of salt too, because
what do you say to that?
Well, look, some people will think the only way that you're being helpful is if you corroborate and give them the answer that they want. But sometimes if you give them another answer that they don't like or they don't want to accept, then you're not being helpful. But you can lead a horse to water. That's the old expression, and it still rings true today. I mean, people are gonna take whatever you tell them, and they're either going to take it to heart or they're not going to take it to heart, and they're going to ask enough people that they get the answer that they want. But I want to move on. Like I want to move towards to 2019. Seems like it was a breakout year for you, or there's so much I want to get to, and I don't want to jump around. But in 2019, was the Greta Thunberg, right? That's when she came. That's when you took that photo of her at Standing Rock.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
How did that come about? Were you just were you one of the few photographers allowed at Standing Rock, which is bizarre to me to even say that, but.
Well, the camp, at DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline protest, the camp at first, there was no cameras allowed whatsoever. But you have to understand, I was already making photographs of Native Americans 5 years already by that time, 4 years by that time. So it had already garnered some trust with the tribe. So the only reason that I got to take a photograph of Greta was that the tribe decided to give up some of 15 minutes of their time with her and the elders' time with her and the children's time with her, and allow this photographer that we trust to try to immortalize her at Standing Rock. And that's really the important part there, is that it was an important photograph at Standing Rock. And the only reason I got that opportunity was because of friendships that I had fostered and cared for, and people that I knew years before. There was a big sign at the camp, no cameras allowed, and there was a gate at first, and you had to go through this. There was a guard there, and you couldn't get your vehicle through without the guard making sure that there's no weapons, no alcohol, no drugs, that kind of thing. They were checking all this stuff, and there was a big sign. I remember being there. This big sign says "No cameras allowed." And here I've got a 5x7 large format camera on a tripod, a large tripod you're not sneaking this thing in, right? And it was just like, this is Shane. He takes pictures down here. We trust him. And the gate opened up, and I went in with my camera, and I had the run of the place for that day with the large format camera before any other camera. And these were on the real early days of the protests, before any other camera was even allowed in there.
And was it the tribe's parameter that said no cameras, or was it there were private security details, and there was all kinds of
Yeah, it was the whoever was managing the camp at that point. It was the tribe and the people that whose land it was and all of that. They wanted to make sure that this did not come into become something they didn't want it to be. So, and they wanted to make sure everyone was safe. So there's no weapons, there's no
Sure.
alcohol, there's nothing like that, no firearms, that kind of stuff. And there one of the signs is no cameras. And there I just go, I got a picture of me just walking onto camp with this large format camera and getting to do what I wanted to do. And but I wasn't doing it for me, I was doing it for them to begin with. So it was a real huge honor, and I'm in debt to them for that.
How did you end up in that community? How did you end up fostering that relationship? Did it start with Ernie Lapointe? Because that's how I found you. I was wanting to do a story. I wanted to have a conversation with Ernie Lapointe. And of course, I saw your photograph, your glass wet plate photograph of Ernie Lapointe, which led me to you on your website.
We have the same origin story then. How you found me, and that's how I found Native American culture, is that I had never known a Native American before Ernie Lapointe. And for your listeners, we should explain that Ernie Lapointe is the great-grandson of Sitting Bull, and proven just recently by DNA, which was a 13-year-long exhaustive DNA tribulation or a trial that he had to. It took them 13 years to do this, and in fact, it was I want to believe that it was a modern day person. It's the longest gap between a modern day person and a historical figure that's ever been proven with DNA, which was rather fascinating. So Ernie, Orlando Scott Goff, was a photographer here in Bismarck, North Dakota, a wet plate photographer in the late 1800s, and he captured the very first photograph of Sitting Bull in the historic wet plate process in my hometown of Bismarck. I found out about him. I found out about this image. It wasn't a photograph of Sitting Bull, which he went on to have many photographs taken of him. It was the first photograph of Sitting Bull. It was taken here, just about 3 miles from where I'm sitting right now talking to you. I found out about that, and I looked up Ernie on Google, found his phone number, and called him, and he knew all about the photograph. And within a week or so's time, he was in my studio, and that was my first experience, my first earnest relationship with anyone from the Native American community. And the portrait we took that day was called Eternal Field. It was also the first portrait that ever got into any museum. So museum number 1 was the State Historical Society in North Dakota, and it was that photograph of Ernie Lapointe, Eternal Field, that knocked down that door. So if any of your listeners want, they can just go on Google and type in Eternal Field Ernie Lapointe, and the portrait of him will come up. So and then from then it was some months and stuff until it got so much recognition, that portrait, that people just started saying, well, you should take some more of these portraits, and it just slowly started to build, and it's all been by word of mouth, and it's just been a wonderful adventure. And my long-term goal is to capture 1,000 Native Americans in this process, and I'm at plate 655 as of last week. So, and I've been doing it for 7-8 years now. So I probably got another 5-6 years to go until I can complete this series of 1,000 portraits. And every 250 portraits, I do a book. So there'll be 4 volumes of books when I'm completed with my series.
And I think there are 2 of those books that are available now, right? They're called Northern Plains Native Americans, A Modern Wet Plate Perspective.
Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 is sold out.
Are they available right now, books 1 and 2?
Yep, Volume 1 has been sold out for some years. There's the trade of edition you can still get on Amazon, but it's not the limited edition copy. And then I do have out on Amazon right now the limited edition copies of Volume 2. And then in 95 portraits or so, I will start working on Volume 3, and we just continue to go forward. But it's been a wonderful adventure. It's been a huge honor, and I consider my Native American work my life's work. I do a bunch of other creative work and stuff, but it's my connection. Calvin Grinnell, the Hidatsa elder, had a formal ceremony about 4 or 5 years ago in my studio and gave me the name Meishte Ekagoche in Hidatsa, which means shadow catcher. And it's just been a fabulous experience, and I owe so many people so much for trusting me and coming into my studio.
Well, you are on the same wavelength with me, because I was just about to ask you about Calvin Grinnell and how he came to bestow the name Shadowcatcher on you, and you just came out with it. So that I think that's really, really kind of cool. But
It was a formal ceremony in my studio, so we actually had to have witnesses. This wasn't just him passing, saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to call you Shadowcatcher from here on." He said, "No, we have to have a formal ceremony, and we wouldn't videotape or we didn't photograph the ceremony itself. It was in my studio, and we had to have witnesses." He told me I had to have witnesses, so I had some of my Native American very close friends come in. I cooked food. I cooked bison and corn chowder the night before. I learned how to make fry bread with Margaret Landon Yellowbird, and we had to exchange gifts. So this formal, it was about a 45-minute ceremony, occurred in my studio, and it's the largest honor that I've ever achieved, not just photography, but in my life, to be able to be accepted in this way. So when Native American sitters, and a lot of these people, you have to understand, are complete strangers. I mean, they've come in from as far as Florida to come in, fly in Florida, come into my studio. I have people from all over the country come in. But before I was Shadowcatcher, they would come in as complete strangers. But if they know that I'm Shadowcatcher and they know that I've been adopted into the Dotson tribe, they come into my brothers and sisters. And that I just can't. I can tell you, and I have to say brothers and sisters because it's hard for me to describe what that means. But when they adopt you into a tribe, when you're given this name, it's not just like I'm giving you a nickname. It's nothing like that. It's much more significant and much more spiritual. And I was really dedicated to this Native American series, Chris, going before this naming. But since that naming thing, I just feel like I have this duty to my friends, to do the best I can for them with every portrait that I take. So I put everyone in the best light possible. And I'm not the best photographer in the world. There's much better photographers out there, but I do the best of my ability to do the best for them when they come in.
Well, and you've said that you don't consider yourself, or you said in your TED Talk that you didn't consider yourself a photographer, and you never thought of yourself as an artist, which is just, I can understand where that comes from, because as an artist, songwriter and artist for 30 years, independent, I know that in my own internal dialogue, I have my own battles and my own little demons, or little whatever you want to call them, that prevent me from saying certain things. But do you consider yourself a historian, or has that changed? Do you now still believe that you're not a photographer, and you don't think of yourself as an artist? Can you still feel that with 4,500, 4,000 plates that you've done? And I mean,
yeah, I accepted I had some older photographers come in, and it was a running joke that Shane still doesn't consider himself a photographer. I had been making plates for some years, and they just broke me down. They would come in and they'd say, "Shane, you have to." Every photographer that knew that I wasn't calling myself a photographer says, "When are you going to call yourself a photographer?" They'd make a comment online. Now, I see this image in front of me, and you're still not considering yourself a photographer. And it wasn't. I just didn't want to insult anyone. I just didn't want to say that I was a photographer, because I knew that there was photographers out there that knew what I didn't know. They knew a lot about what I didn't know, and I'm all self-taught, so this was all on the fly, just a bunch of trial and error for me. I didn't want to insult anyone, and that was really where it is. But yes, I have accepted the title of photographer. I don't feel that I'm insulting anyone anymore with that, and but I still consider myself more of an image maker. In that regard, I'm asked all the time, to write narrations and stuff about my work. Like there may have been an article in a newspaper or a magazine or something, and they want me to sit down and hash something out. I'm not a writer, so I don't feel comfortable. I can do something, some simple writing, but I don't consider myself a writer. I like the fact that my images can speak for themselves, and that's usually where I land. But yeah, and as far as an artist, I've there's a large amount of work that I do is my creative work, and I hope you've probably seen some of that online. And I do I do deviate from. I don't just take portraits of Native Americans. So, but it's fascinating to become. I'm going to be 54 here in January. I was, 43 years of age, and all of a sudden you decide that you're going to do this, and I use that with the students when they come in, because I keep telling them, you got to find that one thing, because I really feel, Chris, that this is what I was meant to do my entire life and for the rest of my life. And I know that may sound corny to some people, but it's the truth. It's how I feel in my soul, that I was always meant to do this. It just took me 44 years to find it. And so I tell the students when they come in, keep looking, okay? You can't be too old, okay? Keep looking, keep challenging, keep, you know what I mean? Like, go out on a limb. It can be just do something, it's just, you gotta have these experiences, and then you'll never know when you're gonna run across that one thing, and you're gonna say, well, I get it now, that's why I'm here. And there's a vast majority of people in this world never get that. So I feel very fortunate to be in this position. There's a large majority of people never have that one thing that they can say, yep, this is what I was meant to do the entire time, my entire life. And I was preparing 43 years up to that point. You don't really realize it, but that entire 43 years led me to this moment.
And that's incredibly powerful, because there are a lot of people that don't know what their purpose is, or haven't found it. They may have not stumbled upon it yet. And I didn't mean to jump across the importance of what I'm really amazed with, or just intrigued, and I find incredibly telling about your work and you as a person, is when you get bestowed a tribal name and that honor. I mean, for a Native American culture to absorb you in, I mean, let's face it, the white Americans don't have a great track record with Native American population, and we still don't. For some reason, we make all kinds of waves about all kinds of other stuff and people and groups, but we always seem to leave out the Native American population in any of this inclusion talk. So when you do these portraits, especially for moments where you're taking photos of these folks that don't usually like their photos taken, I mean, that has to be an incredibly poignant, powerful moment for you, that especially when you do a photo. I guess what I'm trying to get to is the photo of death by oil, and the amount of trust that an image like that takes for a community who's been bowled over time and time and time again. Can you talk about that image?
Well, yeah, and we can kind of death by oil is a photograph that I took. I was seeing what was going on down at the Dakota access pipelines, and not everyone could, and I'm not bragging here, but not everyone could pull this portrait off. Not that you could not everyone could open the shutter and close the shutter and develop the plate. I'm just saying that the trust that I was given on that particular day, and the trust I was given after I shared it online, was rather unbelievable. You are right. The white man has not been kind to Native Americans. I think, a number out there is 75 million Native Americans have been killed by white people since the discovery of, it wasn't discovered, but from Christopher Columbus landing here. Death by oil, it became apparent to me, the story of the Dakota 38. There were some skirmishes, some wars between Native Americans and the white people back in the day. And this is about Abraham Lincoln's era. I don't know exact year. I'd have to look it up. But I found out that Abraham Lincoln had the largest structure built to hang 38 Native Americans on one fell swoop on one specific day right after Christmas in a certain year. And I don't remember, I know all about Abe Lincoln from school, Chris. I don't remember ever hearing this in any of my history books about Abraham Lincoln constructing a gallows a day or two after Christmas and hanging 38 Native Americans at the same moment in time. It just pissed me off to no end. And it not only the act pissed me off, but the false story that I had about Abraham Lincoln, about what I knew about what I thought I knew about this man. We know about the slavery, we know about all the Civil War, we know all these things about. I didn't know this, and maybe I was ignorant, but I know a little bit of history.
I didn't know it either.
I was never taught this.
Neither was I.
So my Native American friends are sharing this story with me, and I could just feel the uneasiness that I had about this, that this is way too far. Like, how can this not be known? And this was just in Minnesota. We're talking, this is only 400 miles from where I live. This isn't on the other side of the planet, for God's sakes. I should know this, right? This should be something that I should know about. I had no idea about it. So the Dakota Access Pipelines was going down at the time. I found out about the Dakota 38, and I just wanted to do something about it. So the image is of a young Native American with a feather on his. I've got right next to the wall here. I've got a plaque where I won an award. This photograph won an award. So he has a feather on. He's a young Native American boy, and I've got a noose around his neck. And if you notice, I've got oil dripping down his arm. The oil dripping down his arm symbolizes the Dakota Access Pipeline. So I was trying to bring the Dakota 38 into present day. So the modern day oil, that was my friend's present day strife. This is what they were fighting against. This is what they were getting shot with water cannons when it was below zero and stuff. This is what they were fighting for. So the oil symbolizes what was going on at the Dakota Access Pipelines, and then the noose around the neck brought to bear in modern day and brought awareness to the Dakota 38. So this young man comes in, and I had never met him before. And so you can about imagine, he agreed to the photograph. I explained it to him what it was, but for me, it was very difficult to put a noose around this young man's neck, even though the noose was not, first of all, I had to get a rope, and then I had to learn how to actually tie a proper noose, which is, it's unnerving. That alone is unnerving. Like just the prep work for me to get the props together was because I know the stories of what we did to the black people. I know the stories of what we did to the Native Americans. To fashion a noose is not something to take lightly. So, but I did. So I fashioned this noose. And when he came in, and it wasn't tied to anything that would ever hurt him, it was just tied to a light, so it would always pull down. But I wanted to prove to him, I put the noose around my own neck, showed him how it tightens and how it loosens, and explained this to him. And I did have there was other elders. I want to say there's about 8 people in the studio at this time, and some of the Native Americans were elders. I went around the room. We composed it. I poured the oil, which is chocolate syrup, by the way, on his shoulder. It appears like oil. And I put this noose around his neck. And I shot. Before I shot Death by Oil, I went around and I let everyone in the room go underneath the dark cloth and take a look at the composition and take a look at what I was about to capture. And I asked each one of them, should I do this? Because at that point, when I saw it, I was thinking I shouldn't do this. Like, this isn't something I should do. And it was a unanimous decision by every Native American, including the young man, that this needs to be done, Shane, that you should do this for us. And that's the words that were used, and we made the exposure, and we made the work, and we shared it with the world, and it got rave reviews. But this could go all sideways. This could have went really sideways. This could have been, people not understanding it. It's all about the intent, Chris. If you understand my intent, but the problem with an image is you don't know the intent, and that's where it's not like you can give a disclaimer. You don't know what my intent was, and you could chastise me and drag me down the street for making this image and not really even knowing what the image is about. So that was the real big tightrope walk that I was walking with this image. But I didn't get any flack from the Native American community. I got flack from people because when I did the portrait, I shared the story of the Dakota 38. I mean, I need to say, why am I doing this, right? So I wrote a little narrative about why, and I explained Abraham Lincoln, and I told the story and this isn't folklore. These are facts. There's historical photographs of the not photographs, but there's a drawing that someone did of the gallows on the day, that stood up on the bluff and took a picture of this, drew a picture of the gallows and stuff. This was a fact, but so many people, the people that had the biggest problem were my fellow white people.
Yeah.
Me saying that I'm like misconstruing who Abraham Lincoln was.
Well, that was the point I was trying to get to, is that we're doing this revisionist history crap where, because the opinion wasn't favorable, of course the backlash came from the people who were perpetrating the atrocities. It wasn't coming from the people that you were showing the atrocity happen to. And the thing is that you do not get the benefit of putting your intent out there with a photo, because you can't put every photo out there with a disclaimer that says, oh, this is chocolate syrup and blah, 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 because that just takes the impact of the photo completely away anyway. You want people to have that impact.
Right.
The backlash is going to come from people, as it is today, where they don't want to talk about America's violent history. We can't, you start talking about that shit and you are public enemy number one. And this goes back to when I heard that, this photo caused a stir, and rightly so, because I wasn't taught about the Dakota 38 either. I had to look it up and read after I saw the portrait, I went and looked it up and did some research on it, because I too have an incredibly favorable opinion of Abraham Lincoln. I love Lincoln. I read all kinds of stuff about Lincoln. I never, ever once heard this story. And when you put this death by oil, and then I read that when you did the Greta Thunberg, you were going to have a mural done, and you had some backlash and actual threats on that.
Threats to my life.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the mural. So, for me, I just want to spend one more moment on Lincoln. Okay, so the flack came from the people. I was tarnishing the images of Lincoln, and all I was doing was telling the truth, right? And this isn't some little thing that he did. This is huge. No time in American history has 38 other people of any color been killed by the President of the United States at one time. Okay? And then what I heard was, he could have killed 258, but he decided to only kill 38. I mean, that doesn't help me. I mean, that's not, what kind of thinking is that? These are 38 people. And so for me, I can't look at Lincoln the same way.
No, me neither.
I can't look at Lincoln the same way. And I, like you said, you looked up to him, and I looked up to him before this as well. But I was shattering that for these people, and they did not like it. They did not want to hear.
Yeah, it's not an interpretation. There's no gray area. There's factual support to it. It's not someone trying to slander Lincoln's portrait. It actually happened. It's not just something that we do today. Is we take these interpretations of different news events, and it's just like this. It's amazing to me, but that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, this was factually documented. An event that happened, and it was pretty shocking that it's not ever been talked about.
So let's go back to the Greta Thunberg thing. So Greta Thunberg, I was given that opportunity to capture her portrait, and so I've got large installations here in town, about 6 of them I want to say right now, and I wanted to. I thought, well, let me give a gift of this portrait, and we'll install this downtown Bismarck on the side of a bakery. And it was not a good thing to do here in Bismarck, North Dakota. We're in the middle of fracking country, and immediately the backlash. I got approval by the city. The city, that's no problem, Shane. They approved the image. They approved the message. There was no, I've got to say that the city of Bismarck was fantastic, like they've always been with all of my work. This is a piece of art. It'll be beautiful on that wall. The bakery said, yeah, no problem. The owner of the building said no problem, and we were going to install it. And then the threats came, and they ended up egging my mural of Liberty Trudges Through Injustice. And your listeners can look that up, Liberty Trudges Through Injustice, Balkowitsch, my last name, and you'll find that image out there of all the images to go ahead and destroy or egg. It was this Liberty Trudges Through Injustice.
Ironic, isn't it?
Yeah. And then the boycotts came. They were going to boycott this bakery, which was only had been in business for a couple of years at that point. And as a business owner myself, I was not going to have any part of that, Chris. So I had to abandon this. I had to pull the installation of this art piece. And within a few hours of that, Fargo, North Dakota, heard about my trials and tribulations and everything that I was dealing with, and they decided to take it there. But then subsequently, after we did install it there, it was egged and destroyed, and I had to replace it the second time there. So there was a faction of people in my home, and I'm born and raised here in Bismarck, North Dakota. I'm not someone from Ohio that just came to Bismarck, North Dakota on a whim. 1969 Bismarck Hospital. I was born here and raised. So this is my home state. So for me, as someone from North Dakota, I think I have the right to, if I'm going to be critical of North Dakota, I have the right to be critical of North Dakota. This is my state. It's not like someone from Texas coming in and being critical of North Dakota. I mean, I live and breathe, and I live in this community, and this is my community, and I give back to this community a lot. And so, if there's a moment of I've got to sing all of its praises, right? We got to sing all of Abraham Lincoln's praises because he did do some good. But then, every once in a while you have to call a spade, and when something happens, you got to say, "Oh, this just isn't right." So, it was there was phone calls, and then there was death threats, and they were going to boycott, and there was the eggings of the mural, and I got the police report hanging up here in my studio, reminded me of what was going on during that time. I even had I was at a dinner with my wife and 4 friends, and we were sitting at dinner. Nobody in the present day, in the last 15 years or so since the invention of cell phones, does someone in the restaurant say, "Mr. Balkowitsch, is there a Mr. Balkowitsch in the room? We have a phone call for you." I mean, when's the last time? That happens in movies, and that happened in movies in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s and the 50s. Never in modern day does someone, the proprietor of a restaurant, look for Mr. Balkowitsch and find him and then hand him the phone. Well, this happened during this right in the middle of this whole thing. and it's not hard to find me. I own Balkowitsch Enterprises. Right. I've got vehicles that have my logo on it, and my car was parked right out front of the restaurant. But that's what the proprietor did. "Is there a Mr. Balkowitsch in the room?" And I said, I raised my hand. "Well, yes, I'm Mr. Balkowitsch." And he came over and handed me this phone, and this person just breathed in the phone, just letting me know that they knew where I was at on that particular moment. And so I hung up the phone, and everyone in the restaurant was just like, "Now what? Is someone gonna come in here? What is going on?" And I wasn't too concerned because I just consider these people cowards. But it wasn't fun for my guests and my wife on that evening to have someone essentially say, "We know where you're at, and we can get you if we want to."
Yeah, they weren't intimidating just you at that point. They were now intimidating the entire restaurant and everything else that was infringing and on so.
But it's not going to stop me. It's not going to stop me. I'm going to continue to call out these kind of things. I'm going to continue to do what I mean, that's the role of an artist, at least, as I define myself as an artist, is it's my job to shed light or to bring attention to certain topics, and I do that relatively. I do that all the time. I just did that with the Roe v. Wade situation. I just made a print that addressed the. I've got 3 daughters, so I'm a registered nurse by trade as well. I should explain to your audience. So I feel that I know a little bit about anatomy and what an abortion is, and the reasons for abortions, the reason not to have abortions, and all that, and to have the rights of my daughters potentially diminished. I didn't sit well with me, so I did I did with a coat hanger and an arm and some, again, chocolate syrup.
Wow. Well, that I haven't seen that one, but I'm sure it's pretty impactful. And the thing about it,
Do you want to know the name of it?
yeah, tell me the name. Tell people the way to look that up.
Without a Choice.
Wow.
Without a Choice.
This is we could there are so many tangents that we can go down, and the point of my show, what I try to do is there is so much serious topic and very the negativity bias in the world is all bad news all the time, and so the Mind Unset, what I try to do is as much as I think it's important to talk about all of these things, I don't do them to a degree where people are going to feel like they're listening to a political talk show, because I'm not smart enough to engage in that. But when it comes to abortion and things like that, I don't think anyone on the planet would ever say that abortion is a good thing. Nobody is pro-abortion.
Yeah.
People are pro-choice, and it's not even. It's about your daughters and 150 or 160 million women's rights to affect their bodies the way they see fit. That's the argument. And without going into all of that, I mean, so with those portraits, and you use the word shed light, and you've been using the exact words that I have in my notes this whole conversation. So I'm sorry if I'm not asking you enough questions or partaking in the conversation, but I don't like to interrupt people. I like to let them go. And whenever I'm thinking of something, you already start talking about it. So it's been...
It's dangerous to let me
go,
Chris.
No, it's not. It's good, brother. It's good. But
be careful what you wish for.
Listen, back...
And I don't mean to, these are some dark subjects too. We should say, I mean, we got some dark subjects. You asked me, so I have to answer you honestly.
No, look, man, your photos are impactful, and I am drawn to the Native American plight. I don't know why. I mean, I grew up in Philly. I don't have any relation to have any means to tell you why I feel connected to Native American authors and Native American situations and stories. It's just what's always been fascinating to me in my life, which is how I ended up discovering you through the Ernie LaPointe photo. But so that the topic, the impactful, what I find interesting, and of course your photography is interesting, and what I like to do is talk to photographers and artists and chefs and musicians and creators, because I find that no matter what medium you're in, there's a common thread that runs through the top of the level that you've achieved. You could be a chef, you could be a opera singer, you could be whatever, and when you reach a certain level, there's a thread that you could communicate with anyone because of what it takes to get there. And so the photography that you do and the art that you make with this process that is hundreds years old and is the vehicle that gets you here. But the message is what's interesting, and the way that you're using your art to make a difference in a world where most people are creating shit on a daily basis that will live for about 30 seconds in the scroll and then not produce any impact, or if it does produce an impact, it's short-lived and people move on. And what the images that you captured at Standing Rock, and there are other people that were there. There were female photographer, I think Tracy, what was her name? She went to jail for her photos there. But this whole process of shedding light on these things is a dark subject. This is one of the only shows that I really will have that. But I think it's important because I think the message and what you're doing with this process is important. I think people like Greta Thunberg and all that stuff, it's a discussion that's happening, and it needs to happen, and rushing it away because we don't like the answer doesn't ever solve anything. What have we ever accomplished, be it in our relationship, in our finances, in our life, by brushing it under the carpet and pretending it doesn't exist? It doesn't do shit. It doesn't do anything good for anyone. So I applaud your gumption and your stick-to-itiveness with this, because taking hits when you get into the limelight is tough. I've taken hits. I've taken the hits. I know what it's like. So to get the backlash is enough to make some people just stop. It's not worth it. The life of your family and your daughters is not worth it. But the message that you're sending by continuing to do your art is the impactful response in and of itself. Whether you address it verbally or not, just by continuing, you've addressed it in my eyes.
Well, there's the humanity of it, right, Chris? I mean, you have to ask yourself, well, Shane, do you take landscapes? And the answer is no. Shane, do you take still lifes? The answer is no. I can think of 2 or 3 images that I've ever taken that didn't have a human's eyes in it. And there's something about that. There's the humanity, right? There's the humanity. During the pandemic, we had to cancel all my, I'm booked out about 7 months for my Friday sessions. That's when I create. And I had to cancel all that. There wasn't a damn way that I wasn't going to continue to create during the pandemic. So I had my family down here. We did an entire COVID series where, I just, you think I'm just capturing what's happening here today, because I did look at some of those 1918 flu epidemic photographs. I looked at the people with the masks. I mean, they wore masks back in 1918. Whoever knew any of this stuff, right? So it was important for me to capture what's happening to me in my life in modern day, in this historic process. And that entire COVID series went to the Plains Art Museum, and all 10 plates there, and they were pictures of all my family, because they're the only sitters that I had. I even did a self-portrait. And I think 100, 150 years from now, you can look back at that and say, well, yeah, they were going through the COVID pandemic then, and this shows us a little sliver of what life was, or what this artist was trying to convey to us in the midst of it.
Right. Real time.
That's all about it. I mean, isn't that the beauty of photography, or songs, or photographs, or books? That's the beauty, because you can essentially communicate with the author hundreds of years later when they're not present. If you read a book in your head as you're reading the pages, it's a one-way communication. They're talking to you, but they're talking to you. And I love that. I just love that. And that's what I love about photography, because I feel, and that's why I don't like a lot of narratives attached to my work, other than the documenting what they're about. But I don't go into these long narratives, because I leave that to the writers. And maybe a writer will write about my work at some point and leave it up to, that's their expertise. I'm not a writer. But my images, and it is cliche, my images speak for themselves. And they tell a story about me, and about North Dakota, and about the people that were around me at this time. And if that voice, who gets the opportunity? If you came in, Chris, and I took your portrait and we made a wet plate and I donated it to one of these museums. I mean, 400 years from now, someone could grab that plate and they look at the image, and they may like it or they may not, doesn't matter. They turn it over, and on the back it has the date that I took it. It has the plate number that I made. It has your date of birth. It has your full name. Maybe it has a little scribble there about who you were and what you did. And then it says, by Shane Balkowitsch, Nostalgic Glass Wet Plate Studio. For a moment, and I've said this before, you and I, if someone utters our names or reads our names in the future, you and I are alive again in some sense. Who gets the opportunity long after they're gone to have someone else appreciate what they did when they did it? It's a very small percentage of people get this opportunity. So for me, it's like an honor. For me, it's something I never take for granted. For me, I do the best that I can to show who I am today. And maybe it may not be interesting. It's not for me to decide if my work's good. First of all, I'm too close to it. It's not for me to decide that if my Native American portraits are historically significant tomorrow, 2 weeks from now, or 400 years from now. It's not for me to decide these things. That's going to have to be for people that are going to have to look at my work long after I'm gone. So I'm not making any of my work for you or me or even my Native American sitters. I really am not. If that doesn't sound too harsh, I'm not making it for you. And I've said this to people when they come in. I didn't make the, people come in and say, well, I don't really like to have my portrait taken. My first response is, well, I'm not taking this for you.
Exactly.
And they just they don't know what to say. I say, and they look at me weird. And I'm saying, this isn't for you. Do you have children? Yeah, I have children. I'm making it for them. And then I'm taking it for their children's children and their children's children. And then it just kind of, it does its thing. So we get too caught up in it's about us right now. You know what I mean? Like everything's just, the center of the universe is focused on what, us in present day and in the present day moment. And when you make objects that will last long after I'm gone, you find something different, and it's really rewarding and fascinating, and it's a huge honor. And the thousands of people that have trusted me and come into my studio over this last decade, it's just been a fabulous ride. I never anticipated it. I never could have planned it. This isn't some game that I thought that I would ever be playing, and here I am. And I know that all I want to do is continue to focus on my work, and I just don't feel like I have enough time, Chris. Now I just don't. It's not like I regret, but I just feel like I'm not going to have enough time to do what I want to do. There's not enough time, and I don't know what to do about that. And maybe it's the oncology nurse in me that's, that's speaking to me. But I feel that something's gonna. I'm just not. There's so much that I want to do with this process. There's so many people that I want to immortalize in this process. There's so many things that I want to portray. I just don't feel I'm going to have enough time to do it.
Well, as having very small experiences with oncology nurses, my stepfather passed away from a tough cancer. But what I learned from people such as yourself is that you do what you can in the moment that you have, and you do the best you can. And after that, it's out of your hands. So at this point, in addition to an artist and a photographer, you're a historian, and you're chronicling these moments that this is my impression from the short time I've known you. You're chronicling these stories that otherwise don't get told, or get told with a vision that is not the truth. And I think when you print something the way you print it as an alchemist, you're really an alchemist when you put these chemicals to the plate and capture the image. There's no falsifying the record. There's no cropping or editing the image to change what the image captured. It's the image, like it or not.
Yes, and that's so true. And it's analog, and there's no replicating it either. I can make a scan of the plate. I should explain to your listeners real quick. I can make a scan of the plate, and we can do paper prints and stuff like that. But there's only one. So when you've seen all my work, and I got to be honest with you, Chris, you've never seen my work. I can honestly say that you have never seen my work until you come visit my studio, or you find someone who has one of my plates, or you go to a museum that has one of my plates. That's when you're going to see my work for the first time. Because if you see it, if I sent you a print today, it's just a false representation of the original plate. So people walk through the front door, there's a huge wall of hundreds of my plates on the wall, the first thing you see. And that's the first time people actually see what it is I'm doing here. And it's about this, if you look at this romantically, and I tell the students this as well, these are 10-second exposures most of the time, okay? For your listeners, I open up the lens for 10 seconds. So these are not snapshots. These aren't snippets, like split seconds of your life, like all digital cameras do, and even film cameras do. It's so quick that you could argue, well, none of my life is on that plate. These are 10 seconds. So I'm actually making a 10-second movie of you. I've got your heart beating in there. I've got the blood coursing through your veins in there. I got a quick blink. I got maybe a quick breath. And guess what? I may have your thought that gets transferred back to the plate. And that's why, and I know that's hopelessly romantic, and not everyone understands the importance of that to me, but that's important to me. These are 10-second movies of everyone that I've ever taken photographs of. It's fantastic. And there's no changing it. The resolution on a wet plate.
So how do you get these images when, 10 seconds is a long time for someone to sit there and not blink or not breathe. And is that the key to getting a non-blurry plate? Is because it's not like if someone moves or something, does it actually ruin the image?
Yes, yeah. And people don't understand moving. You think that, I'm going to move my head back and forth like you're shaking your head back and forth. That's not the moving. You can't move at all. And that's why, I use apparatuses that they used 170. Here's the thing. If it worked 170 years ago, if they could photograph it 170 years ago, why can't I do it today with all of our, all of the technology that we have in our life? So I have a head brace this metal apparatus that grabs the back of your head and holds you completely. Let's go back to Abraham Lincoln, those portraits that you can elicit in your mind, right? Any portrait that you ever seen of Abraham Lincoln, it was a wet plate. I think he had one or two daguerreotypes taken, but a majority of the photographs that you ever know of Abraham Lincoln, those are wet plates. And trust me, if he was in a studio having a formal portrait taken by a photographer, and he's the president of the United States, there was a head brace that grabbed him on the back of the head. You don't see it; it's out of play. It's behind the sitter, but there's something there holding him in place. And then there's just a bunch of teaching and a bunch of coaching not to move. And if you have to blink, it's got to be quick blinks. You can't deviate where your eyes are. If you're looking left while I'm counting and making your image, and you look right, I'm going to have 4 pupils on the plate. These are things that you can easily ruin these images. And I should explain to your listeners as well is not only archivability, the other beautiful thing about it is the resolution of these images. If I started stacking molecules of silver at the tip of my finger, it would take 2 billion of them for you to be able to visualize it with the human eye. So I keep stacking 1, 2, 3, 4. I keep stacking molecule after molecule after molecule. If I could do that, if I could pipette molecule by molecule, I would go to 2 billion, and then Chris would say, I see it on your finger, Shane, for the first time. I'm writing in those molecules of silver. So you can take any one of these plates that I've ever made, put it under the most high resolution microscope. Not a magnifying glass, microscope, and you can't get to the pixel or grain that makes up the image. You can put it right on a person's eye, the microscope, and you cannot see the resolution. There's no pixelization whatsoever. You need an electron microscope at 10,000 power in order to see the molecules of silver clumping to make up my image. So not only am I making a photograph that's going to outlast any other photograph ever taken of you, I am making the most high resolution photograph that's ever been taken of you and will ever be taken of you. So let's ask ourselves, these are truthful images, about as truthful as you can get. And some people will argue, well, it's not in color. I don't care if it's in color. I don't care. I don't need color to have your likeness. For me, it's the most fantastic photographic process man has ever created. And we abandoned it in 1885 for something cheaper, more inexpensive, more convenient. Is really, like we do everything that's important. Sorry to go off on a tangent.
No, tangents are good. Tangentially speaking, that's a really good podcast. If you never heard that one too, they go off on tangents all the time. But back in the day when we were quote unquote progressing, cars everything was about getting faster, more efficient, making life easier, yada, 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 on down the road. So we go all the way full circle in the music business again, where we go digital recording, which is the same X's and O's. It's not really a recording. It's just an interpretation and a representation, because it's not printing on tape. But now everyone wants to go back and cut vinyl. It's like, here we go. It's funny because the process never dies, because the process
and that's the only kind of music that
Go ahead.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Chris, because the only music that's played in the studio is analog records. When the students come in and I'm playing records and they hear the cracking and the scratches and all that stuff on the records, there's an imperfection there, right? There's this sound that sometimes is imperfect, but it seems perfect, and it just seems truer to life than if I'm playing something off, Spotify or something like that. It's just, there's no difference. And your zeros and ones in a long data file have no chance of being here 150 years from now. I don't care who you are. They have no chance.
This is where we go back to sounding like dinosaurs again.
I know.
I'm cool with
That's
that.
okay.
Because, there's a certain amount, there's there's a certain amount of truth, right? That like that I as a I'm producing this show. I've never done it for a long time. I've been recording for 25 years, 30 years. So this show kind of melds all of my talents. I've been a writer for 30 years. So I get to write, I get to record, I get to produce, I compose all of the music. And I'm always in that mindset that it has to be great. Every show, I stopped using the word perfect because I don't believe perfection exists, and I don't have any desire to hunt down perfection, because for me, the beauty is always evident in the imperfection. It's the moments where I have a really shitty day or something happens or something else happens that these little beautiful moments peak up, or something crashes on a track that I was recording for an episode and I didn't save it, so I have to start all over. And then that second track is twice as good as that first track, and I would have never gotten there if I didn't have something happen. So the search for perfection for me now is gone, but the greatness and the truth, there's an immense amount of pressure that everything has to be great. It has to sound great. There can't be a single flaw. Every edit has to be great. There's no blah, 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 blah. And what happens is you lose the truth. Like those vinyl recordings and stuff, man, they're some of my favorite records where they just left in bad notes. They left in drum mishits. They left in because it was just the truth. And I think that the search for perfection has killed the search for truth, which I have much more interest in truth than I do perfection.
Yeah, to go down.
That's my rant.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. But when this process that I practice is anything but perfect. I mean, the people abandoned it because it's rather a daunting, difficult thing to get your arms around. But I say in my studio, I say that the sitter's imperfect. Like you're sitting in front of me, I'm taking your picture, right, Chris? You're imperfect. I know that. Okay, I'm not insulting you. I mean, if you're
absolutely,
you're imperfect. Guess what? The process is imperfect, right? This photo.
My wife will tell you that.
Yeah, my wife as well. The process. So the sitter is imperfect. The process is imperfect. I can tell you there can be squirrels and nuances and things can't develop, and there's a shitload, a boatload of things that can happen to stop me from making a photograph. So we know that Frederick Scott Archer's process is not perfect. The photographer, myself, I'm far from perfect. Okay? But when you bring all these imperfect things together sometimes, guess what? Sometimes you can get something rather perfect. And that's all I strive for.
I've heard you say you're in pursuit of that perfect plate, and then the very next sentence you say, knowing that I'll never get the perfect plate. But isn't each plate just perfect the way it is? Like, isn't each plate just freaking exactly the way it should be, and doesn't that then mean it's perfect?
When I first started, everything, and if I got an image at all, Chris, it was perfect. I felt like I had achieved something, right? And then the perfectionist, there has to be a degree of you want some kind of quality, and then that kind of, it has to come into some degree, or it's just all just shit everywhere. All I can say is that not all the work is created equal. Like I don't like fall in love, and I'm too close to this to ask, but I don't fall in love with every one of my portraits. I mean, I don't. There's just it just can't be. If that was the case, this would be so monotonous and boring. I can't tell you. So I don't. There has to be degrees, and like if I took two of your portraits, people will come in and I'll happen to take two of their portraits, and then I always ask them. This is an exercise that I do. I said, which one's the best? And then they look at me, and they're not used to this question. Like this is very odd that you're asking me. I have two of them, and what do you think they want to say? They want to say, well, I love them both, right? That's 99% of the people say, well, I love them. No, stop. That can't be. These are not the same. They're not the exact same. Which one do you like the best? And it gets them into this thinking that they're just not used to.
They probably look at you for which one you like best so that they can tell you what you think they should think.
And I never try to give that away. And I always know in my heart immediately, I don't have any problem saying that this one's the best of the two. I know the moment. I knew it way before anyone else. I mean, I'm in the driver's seat here, right? I've seen enough of these. I know immediately. I don't feel the same fucking wow every image. I can't. Chris, I got a box of Kleenexes in my darkroom. Why is the box of Kleenexes in my darkroom? People cry in my darkroom. I'll have complete strangers come into my darkroom, and within 45 minutes, they have tears in their eyes in my darkroom. And this has nothing to do with me as a photographer being I made the most beautiful portrait that it brought them the tears. Nothing to do with that. But if you know the story, and everyone that comes in gets the story, I talk about the history, I show them how it's made. There's something about this process that is just, you can't get. When's the last time you took a photograph, Chris, with your iPhone, and someone cried when they saw it on the screen? It's never happened. Why do I have to replace my box of Kleenex. I reminded my wife, I'm running low in the darkroom. I'm not saying every Friday someone breaks down in my studio, but a couple times a month, I got complete strangers. And it takes a lot for a stranger to start crying, right?
Yeah, sure. There's a vulnerability.
What is it? What is that about? What is that about? I never take it for granted. I you know what I mean? Like, these are emotional moments. I find myself giving them hugs, and there's this, because I think that I'm not sure. I don't know if they realize, the significance of the portrait just because they know that this portrait is going to be here long after they're gone. I'm not sure what it is. But it surely isn't my talent as a photographer that's making these people cry. There's something that they find an attachment to these images, that there's some kind of release. I'm having a hard time. You're a writer, and you may be able to put some words to this, but I don't know what it is that would make someone cry when they saw their portrait.
Well, I'm certainly not going to speak for someone, but I think that it's understandable to me that they would, because I think maybe they view themselves in a different way, or maybe you captured, you said in addition to their image, you capture their thoughts, you capture their breathing, and maybe that was a moment when they come to someone where they know they're not just getting a click portrait that's going to be, there's a whole process, and you put that apparatus behind their head to steady them, and then they are, I find it hard to imagine that once I felt something clamp the back of my neck, I wouldn't be immediately transported to another place, another emotion, that this is different. This is maybe this hurts. Maybe this truth hurts. Maybe this is joyful. Maybe you've captured something they were trying to capture their entire lives. I don't know what that is, but maybe there's a bit of catharsicism that goes on when they come to you, because it's not like you can just do a digital portrait. They have to travel to you. It takes effort. It takes a physical effort to get to Bismarck, book the thing. It's intent. Exactly. And very few things in our modern world are inconvenient or cost time. Like, we can do anything. You can get online and order your groceries right now, and you don't even have to go to the store. But to take a picture like this, for people to come to your studio, mm-hmm. It's intent. And in that intent, I don't think you show up in the studio to get a mundane photo of yourself that you could get by snapping it in your mirror or taking a selfie. I think when people get to you, you're almost, I would imagine, sort of like a psychologist or a really good bartender, where you're going to pull something out of them that they're ready to get rid of, but they have no idea how they want to get rid of it until they sit down in your chair. And then they see that image. And obviously, for the ones that break down, it's not about being stranger. It's about the trust they have to give you in order to take that picture in the first place. So once that trust is established, then it's met with the grace that I think you have, that I don't think anyone could argue you don't have, with the 600 photos of Native Americans that are put their trust in you to capture their story. So I think when it comes down to it, it's the story that you tell with the image that is making people have a reaction that they wouldn't get from other images. I'm just, philosophizing here if you want to talk about romanticism, but I know that I'm speaking from a place where if I sat down in your chair, that would be the reason I'm there. I'm there because I can take a selfie with whatever. I can even go get my old film camera and, take a film image. But if I show up in your studio, there's a reason that I'm in the studio for that amount of effort and for that process. So I don't know.
With modern photographs, we don't have any skin in the game. It doesn't cost us anything. If we take those extra 100 photographs, it didn't cost us a penny even. And there lies a part of the problem too. These portraits are rather, this is an expensive process. And if everyone, I joke, if an iPhone photograph, if everyone got charged $1 every time they took an iPhone photograph, I think there'd be a lot less photographs, and I think there'd be a lot better photographs. And I think we take a lot less photographs of stuff that just, it doesn't have any place. It doesn't, and I'm not like some judge of what should be photographed and what shouldn't, but I'm guilty of this myself. One of the things that I struggle with, Chris, is that, how these images, once I make them, how they become invaluable. Like, I'll take someone's portrait and, they'll love it and I'll love it, and we have it there and it's got to go on the drying rack. And sometimes I've made a mistake where I've dropped it, or let's just say theoretically I dropped the image and it gets broken in front of us. So we took a portrait, we really liked it, and it got broken. You can't replace it. I can sit that person, they're still in my studio, I can sit them down, I don't even move the camera, I can take the same photograph, but the photograph that I take, I can never get back to the photograph from 7 minutes ago or 20 minutes ago.
No, you'll never get that back.
The broken photograph can never be replaced. So I start with this piece of glass that's $12. If I just take a piece of glass before I put an image on it and throw it around, it gets broken. I'm not out anything other than the $12 it costs me to make that, to have that piece of glass. The chemicals, there's a certain amount of money that goes into those, but all that stuff can be replaced. But as soon as the person sits in front of me and I put their image on that piece of glass with those chemicals, I have something that I can't put a dollar price on. There's no, what's it worth? Is it worth $1? Is it worth $500? I've sold plates for as much as $3,000 a piece. Is it worth $3,000? How much is my Evander Holyfield portrait worth? How much is my portrait of Ernie Lapointe, the great-grandson of Sitting Bull, worth? And I'm not, and I don't mean to be in this, everything has to have a dollar value. My point is that none of those amounts work. For any of those portraits, it doesn't matter if it's Evander Holyfield or Ernie Lapointe or Greta Thunberg or Deb Haaland, or it doesn't matter, John Batiste, or these are all people that I photographed. It doesn't matter. The normal photograph of Joe Schmo in my studio, it's invaluable. I can't replace it. Even as the artist that made it, I can't get you back 15 minutes ago. I can never, so these are snapshots of time in a process in silver that's going to last a long time. And so I struggle with this. How do I have something that 15 minutes ago had no value whatsoever, and now all of a sudden we created it together and it's invaluable and we can't break it. We got to covet it. We got to take care of it. And we'd be devastated. You want to talk about someone crying? I'll break out in tears if I break the wrong plate. Why is that? How does that... What was the important factor? Is it the time that we spent together? What puts the value on these objects that I made?
The image is going to be different because the emotion is now, and the reaction is different, because before you broke the image, then it was a different energy. And now after you broke the image, you're capturing an equally independent and equally unique image, but it certainly will never be the image that happened before. And just to be clear, like, we're not I don't think either of us are condemning the people snapping 100 photos because they're extremely thrilled about. I mean, that's
No.
there's not a it's
I'm
not a
not.
right or wrong. It's not, if you snap 3,000 images on your iPhone, nobody's condemning you and no one's saying this is that and this is that. But your
No.
process is specifically, we're talking specifically about a legendary, I keep losing the word, a legacy process that is a purpose. You are, to me, as a historian, you're chronicling history and you're chronicling people's experiences. So we're not, before people listen in and they go, man, these guys just sat down and shit on, digital photography for 2 hours. It's not what we're doing. We're just making a case that you said there's no skin in the game. And that comes down with anything, I think. If you can just chuck it away and delete it without a problem, you have a mindset of, oh, well, maybe it's not that important, or it's less important than, and maybe you don't have that mindset. Maybe that's just my mindset, where I snap 20 pictures on my iPhone, but then when I go home, I sit down and I delete 19 of them because I go, I don't even know what I was looking at there. I don't know what that is.
But there's an editorial thing there, right? There's an editorial thing there. You're editing. There's intent for that, right? And we're not. I've got digital. I actually have an official digital photographer for my studio. I'm not putting down digital photography, for God's sakes. But you're having on the podcast an analog photographer that practices the archaic 170-year-old process. I have to give you my slant.
Of course.
If I don't give you my slant, this conversation is not that interesting, right?
Of course.
It's not that interesting.
Of course.
But the fact is, your digital camera and that iPhone would not exist without Frederick Stott Archer. And these pillars of photography that came before and figured all this shit out for all of us. This isn't my process. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just borrowing what he gave the world. It's his process. And that's why I openly share this process with other people. I've trained many people in this. I don't even charge. I train many people. If photographers want to learn this process, they come in on a weekend. They spend the whole weekend with me. I show them. And because it's not my process, right?
No,
It's
you're
not my
a
process.
steward, and I know that you are all about sharing the
But
process.
I want to show the advantageous. I want to show why this process, Chris, is still viable when a lot of people say it's not.
Yeah.
Like, why would you do that? When I have something that's analog, it exists. I know that. If I have something that's analog, it exists. And I can touch it, I can feel it, I can listen to it, I can view it. If we don't have things that are analog, it's not here in the real world. And during my TEDx talk, I use the example, my camera, I mean, here, how can I knock digital photography? I got 20,000 photographs on my camera. If I I weighed my camera with the 20,000 photographs, deleted my 20,000 photographs, and weighed the camera, it would weigh the same. And I don't mean to be too much of a simpleton about this, but that tells me one thing, that those images, they're not here. They're not in the real world. Because if they were here, they would add something to the weight of that camera. They have to be here physically, and they're not. They're a bunch of zeros and ones on some magnetic drive somewhere, and I have no chance of getting these into the future. But I do, because what have I done as a photographer with 20,000 photographs? And my iPhone's my only other camera, by the way, Chris. I've printed off every one of those photographs. There's drawers behind me, and students come in and I'll go through my drawer and I just start throwing these little books of all these photographs. I've got 20,000 photographs from my iPhone printed. And why do I do that? Because I don't trust digital. If I think that they're important, at least someone could paper through these prints at some point, and they exist. And that's all. I mean, if you don't care about it existing, do you only want it for that? Do you just only want it for that 3 seconds as you scroll on your screen? You just want to look at it once, and that's enough. You take a beautiful portrait of your wife or something like that, and you don't want that in the future. We don't care about our pictures that way anymore.
Well, yeah. I mean, I I just think it's I just think everything's too easy. And I mean, that's just, now we're just going to go down the rabbit hole of like my dad used to, when I was a kid and I walked 10 miles to school, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think easy is bad, but I think that there's a place for people that want to do analog stuff. And I think that the people that want to engage themselves in the process further should be allowed and applauded for that. And then there's people who are doing really cool stuff with digital photography. And I mean, and there's cool people doing stuff with digital music. And I mean, it's not my lot. It's not I don't feel the warm and fuzzies from a digital track, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad digital track. I'm not in any position to say what's great art and what's not. I know what resonates with me, but I think because, and I do see the point of when you print something out, you actually have a physical thing that you can actually have a response to. But I think a whole generation of people just are totally cool having their response to their screens, which is, the older I get, the less I enjoy that at all. There's very little pleasure in that. So the cathartic process is I'm less concerned about the end result as I am about the process with anything these days. We could go on ad nauseum because we're two old dinosaurs apparently, and so what I want to do is,
I'm glad we've determined that.
Where can people if there's nothing else we solved in this hour and 40 minutes, we determined that. So where can people find your work? Talk about the books real quick before we tie it all up.
I'm just continuing. I'm trying to get to my third volume of my Native American series. So you can find my books, Northern Plains Native Americans, A Modern Wet Plate Perspective, on Amazon. They're both out there. There's the trade edition, which is volume 1. Like I said, the limited edition book is sold out. But my volume 2 that just came out in March is out there, and I'll start working on volume 3. If you go to Google, just type in Balkowitsch, Balkowitsch, Wet Plate, 2 words, and you're going to get hundreds of different articles and links and stuff out there. On Amazon, if you have Amazon Prime, you can watch my documentary called Balkowitsch. 2 young filmmakers followed me around for nearly 2 years and put this hour-long documentary that's won some awards together. They can find out there. You can my work's out there. If you want to find me on Facebook, you can find me on Instagram. Both places on Balkowitsch, the same name, Balkowitsch. It's been an honor, Chris, talking to you. I hope I think we discussed some things that I wanted to say for sure. I hope we haven't bored anyone. I just don't want to. I just want to continue to capture more people. I want to continue to share this process with the world. And I just want to see where it all leads me. And I just plan on doing this for as long as I can possibly do it. And if any of your listeners are ever through the North Dakota area, they can look me up and come in on a Friday and watch what I do. And I have an open door policy here in my studio. So it's always a rewarding thing when visitors come in. I have a natural light studio that I built here. I take photographs using window light just like they did 170 years ago. So it's a creative haven for me, and anyone's always welcome to come in and see this process in person.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time and your mission and your work. I think it's fascinating, and I go down the rabbit hole when I start to look at the images because they are spectacular pieces of art, and I would love to get up to the studio and see you one day. So if I'm coming through Bismarck, you can be sure that I'm going to be banging on your door. All the best to you and your family this holiday season, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for everything. Thanks for your kindness, Chris.
Oh man, 'tis the season. We are in it now. There's no turning back. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you're hearing, please share it with your friends. We are actively trying to expand our reach, and we don't do that without you. If you want to get on the email list or find out how to support the show, you can do both at themindunset.com. Next week, I'm flying solo. And speaking of flying, are you traveling for the holidays? Are you already feeling those holiday blues? Well, I got your back. Next week is all about the holidays. Think of me as your Audible Xanax, mother's little helper, and I'll help you get through it. Make sure you come back for that. And until next week, you know what I'm going to say. Be nice, do good stuff.